Hello everyone, no mai, haere mai and kia ora from New Zealand. Sorry about our small technical difficulties. It is Friday evening for us here, so it's been a busy long week. My name is Prudence. I am based in Christchurch in New Zealand, and I've been recruiting from overseas for the last 25 years, and it's my pleasure to work alongside Rachael Mason and Lane Neve and talk through the immigration, registration, relocation and resettlement in New Zealand. So as I said, I've been doing this 25 years. We're a free service, the employer pays us. So that's the most important thing to get out of the way. Part of our job is obviously to find you a job, but a lot of what we do is we go through the process of helping you with your CV or your resume and the all-important recommendation or reference letters. So we talk about the requirements of working in New Zealand. We talk about the market and jobs and what's available in New Zealand, and the registration, the job interviews and the relocation. One important thing, and probably 80% of the process, is to get your professional registration with the Medical Council of New Zealand. Now, I've been working with the Medical Council for over 20 years. They're very particular about documentation and paperwork, and they have to do their full due diligence, which is understandable, but it's our job to help smooth that process. After we've talked about everything, we'll have a decent question time and discussion time. So a little bit about ACCENT Health Recruitment. As I said, we offer a free service. We assist with professional registration with the Medical Council, obviously your job search for employment, the interview preparation, which is talking about what's important in an interview, how to prepare for an interview, what's questions you're going to be asked. Now, some interviews last 15 minutes, and they offer you the job on the spot. Some last 2 hours and then they take a couple of weeks to offer you a job. So every employer is quite different. I've had GPs sitting on couches, chatting informally with a cup of tea, right through to sort of 5 people in a panel and quite a lot of questions. We'll talk a little bit about the interview questions and what's important to put your best foot forward. But ACCENT Health Recruitment have over 50 years collective experience in recruitment, and we are the preferred suppliers to the hospitals and clinics in New Zealand. So we are very much a favourite of the employers, and because we only recruit into New Zealand, the employers love it. And as I said, we're a free service, the employer pays us. We do request that you work exclusively with us, which is just a handshake agreement to say you're the agency that will help us find you new job and new life in New Zealand. So we recruit to the whole of New Zealand. This is actually sign language for New Zealand, and that's quite cool because it's the North and the South Island. And we recruit to the North Island and the South Island, the East and the West Coast, and to the private and the public hospitals in New Zealand. We do a lot of recruitment into general practices, so GPs or family medicine physicians, and community organisations like palliative care, rehab, hospice, all jobs in New Zealand. And it's probably just quite important to remember, and I say this quite frequently, is the patient population in New Zealand is so much smaller that we just don't have the wide variety. I think in 20 years, the only time I haven't been able to recruit someone he was an ankle surgeon, and there just wasn't a job for him at that time in the whole of New Zealand, because often doctors have to be able to do on-call, trauma, acute, elective weightlift stuff. And you can be hip and knee and ankle, and that would be broad enough, for example, if you're orthopedic, or you could be just spine. But generally, you have to be able to cover quite a wide patient population. So a little bit about the job market. Thanks to our friend COVID, we've got a lot of doctors and nurses who are pretty tired and resigned. We did really well with COVID in New Zealand. Obviously, we shut our borders, but now immigration, and Rachael will talk to you more about that. But the visa process is pretty smooth. Health professionals are very welcomed in New Zealand, and they do online video conferencing. So it's a bit like a date that you have to be on time, prepared, looking smart, and have questions ready. The positions and the health practices do vary a little bit from your current role. Patient times for GPs around 20 minutes, and you have a bit more administration time. So I think working as a GP in New Zealand is pretty generous, and working in New Zealand, you tend to work 8:30 till 4:30, Monday to Friday, so you definitely have the weekends off. There is sometimes on-call or evening work, but generally it's 40 hours a week. And the benefits are 4 weeks minimum paid holiday, plus we have 13 public holidays in New Zealand. We also have regional holidays. The good thing is relocation cost is covered. So now it's quite common for all employers to pay relocation, which is really good. So they'll pay for your flights and your spouses or partners' flights and the children's flights. As I said, we're a free service. You work exclusively, and you'll have one named recruiter, which is really great. So you'll have that one person, and almost guaranteed you'll get a reply to an email at the end of each day. And the time zones can make it a bit tricky, like it is tonight, Friday night, but it's we're pretty quick by email. So the registration with the Medical Council is super important to, obviously you must have it to get a job in New Zealand. You either have worked 33 months in Israel or another comparable health system like the UK, the US, France, Germany, Iceland. There's a list of countries, but if you've worked for 33 months out of that 48, and it has to be in the same scope of practice. So you have to have worked as a GP for 33 months out of 48, minimum 20 hours a week. If you've had time off for maternity leave, but you've been doing, extra study, or you've been working part-time, but it averages out to 20, sometimes Medical Council will take that into consideration. So depending on the registration pathway, quite often you need a job first. And the good news is employers will wait 6 months for you to get your registration. Not that it takes that long, but they will wait 6 months by the time they have their first interview right through to you arriving in New Zealand. Now, the English language requirement is pretty strict, but you can do the OET at home, or the at-home OET. You can get the OET of a mark of 350 or more, or the IELTS speaking, listening, reading, writing minimum of 7. There's very little leeway for that minimum of 7 for the IELTS, and it must be the academic version. And it is hard, and I have a lot of doctors sitting it a second or third time and understanding that reading is probably one of the trickiest modalities of that test. So you need to supply references or recommendation letters. Now, these references are vitally important, and they're used for employment, for immigration, for finding a house or rental, and also for Medical Council. The reference letters have to come from us to the referee or the recommendation writer back to us. So there can't be a third party involved, and we have to confirm that email trail. But the 3 recommendation letters have to come from a doctor who's worked with you in the same scope of practice. So if you're an orthopaedic surgeon, an orthopaedic surgeon has to write it. And they have to write and comment on your abilities. And look, it is a long reference form that has to be done. It does take a good hour to fill it in. So I do think the referees or the letters written for recommendation, it's really important. Also, Medical Council needs to know in New Zealand that your documents are legitimate and you are who you say you are. Unfortunately, because of people who have committed fraud in the past and pretended to be doctors and come to New Zealand and probably every country in the world, we have to do an external verification of qualifications. So that's called EPIC. And if you have any questions about that, just email info@accent.net.nz, put your questions, subject line, and I'll be able to fix that. So depending on the scope of practice, the medical counsel will take between 1 month and 6 months. I had a doctor who applied as a gastroenterologist and his vocational registration took 13 weeks. So we're really happy about that. And it is possible. We can push a little bit depending on when you want to start, but generally be prepared for between 1 and 6 months. So the job interview. This is the fun part for me, is helping people get ready for their interviews. As I said, it's a bit like a date or running a webinar that you're just talking on a screen. We schedule the interview, so obviously with the different time zones, it's not too bad. I think it's 12 hours difference, or it might be 13 between New Zealand and Israel. And we help prepare the employer with the information. Sometimes we sit in on the Zoom meeting. Sometimes we just set it up for you, or you connect directly with the employer by email and then arrange to set up a time. We do a mock or rehearsal interview with you, and that's a practice via video conferencing. So I will ask you things like, tell me about yourself. Give me an example when you made a difference. Tell me about a time you made a mistake. Tell me, how would your peers describe you? I had one the other day that was, what if you were an animal, what kind of animal would you be? And I thought that was a bit of an unusual question, but they all had a bit of a laugh about that. The interviews are just as informal as our chat with you. Sometimes there's a panel, which is a little bit daunting, that you have maybe 5 or 6 people in a room talking to you, and be aware that there could be technical difficulties. We'll give support on the day before and afterwards, and often I'm waiting on the phone wondering if that interview's finished and how it's gone. And we also encourage you to have a second interview or a third conversation. If it's a GP practice, ask to have a Zoom video around the practice so you can see what it's like. You know, what's the tea rooms like? What's the medical rooms like? The reception, things that might be important to you. So the job offer, as I said, once you have the interview, the job offer will come anywhere between an hour, and a month after the interview. So that whole process can be a little bit nerve-wracking, that you're waiting for that job offer, and you'll get sent it by email. We'll get sent it first, and we often look at it, and we sometimes go back to the employer and say the start date is not realistic, or the salary could be a little bit more, or the shift work won't be suitable. So we'll liaise with the employer to get the best option for you. We'll look at a realistic start date, and we'll also assist with sending Rachael and reminding you of the appropriate documentation that you need for the visa application. And we'll also talk through the timeline with you. So we say you've now got maybe 7 months to sell your house, pack up your belongings, get your cats chipped, get your children ready, tell your parents or your in-laws, and just go through the whole process of coming to New Zealand. But be aware there's a standard salary across New Zealand, and I'll talk about salaries in a wee minute. But Te Whate Ora, which is the New Zealand health system, Te Whate Ora, which is the Māori name for New Zealand Health, has one set of salaries across New Zealand, and that's based on years, and they're steps. And again, if you want a copy of them, I can happily email them to you. So we have a free relocation service. Sometimes the employers give a more robust relocation service, but we take you through the process, and it does take 3 to 6 months minimum to settle into your new role. The first couple of days can be a little bit daunting. And a little bit confusing, driving on the left-hand side of the road, dealing with different weather, different accents, different geography, and different cultures. So it does take a while to settle in. We recommend at least 10 days before you start work to get to New Zealand. I had a doctor who was from Tel Aviv, and he was a general practitioner, and he came to New Zealand, and I interviewed him a month after he'd been here, and he said he was quite wary of people offering stuff. Like he bought some appliances and a bed, and the person selling them said he'd drop them off, and he wasn't sure whether to accept that. But of course, in New Zealand, it's your gut feeling, but generally everyone is pretty generous with their time and helping out. But we also make sure you've got your bank account and insurance, especially the Medical Protection Society insurance, so your professional indemnity insurance. We help with tax numbers, cell phone numbers, and initial accommodation. So we'll write you a letter as a recommendation to help you get into a house, to rent a house. So it's like a rental recommendation reference. Things like purchasing a car, converting your license so you can drive on your own home country license for 12 months. And we also set you up with a buddy network. So if you're a GP or a nurse or a particular specialty, we'll just find someone who's got similar sort of age, with or without children, and say, look, help out this guy. He's arriving in a couple of weeks. Have an email with them, and then you can make that connection. We also set up and encourage a workplace visit before you start. So we get you to go into work, meet with your boss, have a cup of coffee. We find that we had someone arrive last Friday, and she went into work. She arrived at 6 a.m, went into work at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, met everyone, had the weekend to relax, and started on Monday, which was a little bit ambitious, but she hadn't come from too far. But, some people take longer. If you've got children, you want to settle them in and into school as well. So a little bit about the all-important salaries. Now, I've lived in the UK, I've lived in Bahrain, I've spent a lot of time in Australia and the US, and I truly believe the New Zealand salaries are very good compared to the rest of the world when it comes to the cost of living. If you're earning over 100,000, you should be very comfortable. A lot of these salaries are just starting salaries, so there's extra salaries, extra payment for shift work and for, working in the weekends and evenings. But, the tax rate might seem high as well, but I think New Zealand's taxes pay for a lot of really good things like free healthcare. Also, your professional indemnity insurance, your licence insurance, is only about $1,000 a year, and I understand it's probably about 45 to 50,000 in your home country, but it depends again on your situation. So a little bit about what to expect. Rachael will talk more about the work permits, but it's really important to understand that you get free dental and GP care up to 18 and subsidised visits to the GP, free acute care from the government, and ACC, which is New Zealand's Accident Compensation Corporation. It's a compulsory public liability insurance, and I think it's absolutely superb. If you break your leg skiing in the weekend, or you drop a patient and they break their leg, they can't sue you, so it's non-litigious, and also your salary will be covered and assistance to help recover you back into the workplace. So over to Rachael to talk about visas. I'll put myself on mute, but happy to chat. I can hear my kids in the background. We have fish and chips every Friday, which is, it's not the healthiest, but it's only once a week, and the kids enjoy their fish and chips. So I can hear the paper rattling in the background. Hopefully they've saved me some.
Thanks very much, Prudence. It's fish and chips is also very popular on Friday nights in my family, so that's a Kiwi tradition. I think borrowed from the United Kingdom, but we've adopted it here. So yeah, thank you so much everybody for joining us tonight. And again, yeah, apologies for our technical issues at the start, but hopefully we're all well underway now. And yeah, thanks to Prudence for that very helpful rundown of the process for finding work in the medical profession. It's my pleasure to be here tonight to talk to you about the visa pathways that would apply. So let's launch. And just before we do, just a brief introduction to myself and Lane Neve. I'm a dual New Zealand and British citizen, and I've spent over 20 years now specialising in immigration law in those two places. So I've pretty much seen it all. I've seen all kinds of difficult and challenging cases in my time, so it will be hard to shock me if you think you've got a challenging case. I've probably dealt with something similar in the past. We here at Lane Neve, we are also a full service law firm, so we offer other kinds of law such as conveyancing or helping you buy a house or sell a house, wills and family trusts, and a lot of other things too. So that's a little bit about who we are. There are around about 10 specialist immigration lawyers in my team. I'm a partner of that team, and we've helped people from all over the world, and from the places that we've got on this webinar tonight, from the US, the UK, Israel, Singapore, Asia, Europe. We have helped all sorts of people, and tonight is all about medical roles. But if you're listening to this and you're not in a medical role, we do also help, or your partner isn't, or you've got friends and family who aren't, we actually can help with any kind of job, people in any kind of job. So bear that in mind too. Okay, well, before we talk in too much detail about the specific visas that apply, I wanted to first explain something very important, a very important difference, and that is the difference between a temporary visa and a residence visa. Now, temporary visas are good to have, but they are, as described, only temporary. So residence visas are much better to hold, and the key advantages of holding a residence visa are set out on this slide here. So firstly, the ability to stay here long term if you choose to, and you're protected from any changes to the immigration rules. And if you compare that, if you're only on a temporary visa and the immigration rules change, then maybe you won't qualify to extend that visa if the rules have changed. Whereas with a residence visa, you are much more protected from changes like that. You also have better civic rights here in New Zealand. So that means, for example, the right to vote in our elections, the right for your children to be able to attend our tertiary, university level institutions in the same way that a New Zealand citizen would, rather than paying international student fees. So for those reasons, it's ideal if you can get a residence visa at the earliest possible opportunity. And always that's what I encourage my clients to apply for residence as quickly as you can. I also think this is very important when you're thinking about moving to the other side of the world. It's a big deal. It takes a lot of time, effort and money to move, particularly if you have a family. So if you're going to do that, you don't want to do it and think that you may need to leave in 2 or 3 years. You want to know you can stay long term. And so that's also why a residence class visa is great to have. And the really good news is that for almost all of the medical professional roles, there is actually a visa category that allows you to apply for a residence visa for you and your family straight away. So that's a really huge advantage. And that is called the Green List Straight to Residence Class Visa. So I'm going to spend most of our time tonight talking about that visa and how you qualify. On this slide here, you'll see the main criteria that you need to meet in order to qualify for a straight to residence class visa. And we're going to look at each of these in a little bit of detail. First and foremost, you need a skilled job offer in a role that's on the green list. And I'll come to talk about that in detail. And Prudence is obviously going to be a critical person in helping you find a job that's in a green list role here in New Zealand. You're also going to need registration with the appropriate council, in most cases the medical council, but could be the psychiatrist board, for example. And so Prudence has spoken a little bit about that too. You need to be aged 55 years or younger. You need to meet health and character and have good English language ability. So I'll come to talk about these different requirements in a moment. Starting first with a role on the green list and registration. So you can see on this slide a selection. This is not all the roles. This is some of the roles to give you a sense of the types of roles that are on our green list and would get straight to residents. And you can also see who is the registration body that applies. Now, the green list is called the green list, meaning traffic light, green for go, because these are roles that are already in short supply in New Zealand. And so the purpose of this visa category is to make it attractive and easier for you to come here to help attract these types of people to New Zealand. So the idea of this category is we want to give these types of people residence early on so they can feel settled with their families and they're willing to move here and start a new life on this side of the world. Now, so as I've said, it's just a selection. So if your particular specialisation or occupation isn't on this list and you are a medical professional, it may well be it is still a green list. My slide wasn't big enough to fit all of the roles. Health and character is also really important, and each family member, so the main applicant who's going to get the job offer, and each of their partner and children also need to meet health and character requirements. And we do have a very strict requirement on each of these. So talking first about the health requirement, the requirement is that anyone that's applying for a visa cannot have a health condition or more than one condition that would place significant cost or demand on New Zealand's public health or education systems. And so what that means is that if you have a condition that requires expensive medication or perhaps requires specialist care, ongoing specialist care, or has a likelihood of hospitalisation, then you may not meet our health criteria. Minor health conditions, maybe it's asthma or high blood pressure that's well managed, are usually not what we call a deal breaker. They usually won't mean you can't get the visa, but sometimes they can slow the application process down. But more serious conditions could end up being an actual deal breaker. And it could be you as the main applicant could have a heart condition, or it could be that you've got a child that's got, for example, autism spectrum disorder or some other condition which might trigger a health issue. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't get a visa, and we have a lot of experience with helping applicants who have medical conditions. So if that's you and you're watching this and you're thinking, oh no, maybe we can't get a visa, definitely get in touch and get some good advice about this, because we have successfully argued in a lot of cases that even though a person doesn't meet the health criteria, they should still be granted a visa. That's called a medical waiver, and I don't have time to talk about that tonight, but if that's you, I'm happy to talk to you about it, and it certainly, there are a lot of people that can still qualify even with quite serious health conditions, particularly for medical people, where there's a lot of benefit that you're going to bring to New Zealand. In the same way, we also talk about character, and when we talk about good character, we're referring to your not having a criminal history, but we're also talking about having a good immigration history in other countries. And again, even if you do have something like this in your past, or someone in your family does, there are still grounds that we can make good arguments that won't mean your visa is declined. So again, get in touch if that is you. Okay, English language ability. This applies to the main applicant and also to the partner or spouse. But the partner or spouse is actually, if your partner or spouse doesn't speak good English, that's okay. You can actually just pay a fee instead of doing the testing if you choose to. However, the main applicant absolutely must meet the minimum standard of English, and it's quite a high standard. You can imagine if you're coming to practice as a doctor here in New Zealand, you need to be able to speak the language and speak it well. So certain qualifications, so people who have obtained qualifications from the countries listed on the slide, they probably won't need to do the test. But for everybody else, and that's most people, you will need to do one of the different approved tests. A common one that lots of people have heard of is the IELTS, but there are other ones also that you will need to do in order to be able to qualify for this visa. And ideally, if you can, you want to do just one test that will tick the box for visa and also for the medical council registration. And then lastly, you'll recall that I also mentioned you need to be 55 years of age or younger. It's also very important to understand the rules for your partner and children, for your family. And so the way that I describe it is that your family members piggyback off the main applicant. So if you're the main applicant and you successfully qualify for a visa, as long as your partner and children meet the criteria too, they will also get the same kind of visa you did. So you get residence, so will they. Your children can be included all the way up to 24 years of age, but there are different rules in the age groups that are listed on this slide. So it's harder, the older the child gets, it can be harder to include them, but it can be done, particularly if they're still dependent on you for most of their needs. Here in New Zealand, we recognise a variety of different partners can be included. So de facto, same-sex, civil partner or spouse are all recognised and acceptable as long as you can show that it's a genuine, stable relationship and you've been living together for at least 12 months. Okay, so this next slide is talking about the application process. So if you've met all of those criteria, then and you get a New Zealand job offer, then you should be able to apply for that straight to residence visa. When that is first, or actually before I say that, I'll just talk briefly about the processing time. So the processing time at the moment for a straight to residence visa can be anything from 2 to 8 months. We often see these applications done quite quickly at around the 2 to 3 month time frame for people coming from countries where it's really easy for Immigration New Zealand to do the cross-country checks. But for some other countries, it can take up to even 6 or 8 months. That's not unusual. And so sometimes what would happen in these cases is that you would do 2 applications at the same time. You would do the residence application and you would also do a temporary work visa application at the same time. That way the visa would be issued, the work visa, temporary visa, would be issued within just 2 or 3 months. You could come in and start work and your children could go to school and your partner could start work. You could start settling down. And at the same time, your residence visa is processing in the background. So that's one option. Some of my clients would prefer not to make the move to New Zealand until they know they've actually had the residence visa approved, because they're cautious to make that big move without knowing they've definitely got the long-term ability to stay here. It's a personal choice, and often it's a negotiation with the employer. I know from speaking with Prudence, with lots of the cases we're doing together, that in many cases an employer is prepared to wait around about 6 months for someone to come out here because they've already been waiting a long time to find the right candidate. And if you're the right candidate, then they will wait to get the right person here. But sometimes you need to be prepared to negotiate on that point. So initially, when that visa, the residence visa is approved, it's called probationary residence. That's not the official term, that's my term. What this means is that it has travel conditions for 2 years. And at the end of that 2-year period, if you've lived and worked here in New Zealand, you can then apply for permanent residence. And once you have permanent residence, you can't lose that. You can lose probationary residence. If you got residence and then you went home to your home country and you didn't actually live in New Zealand, you could lose your residence status. And similarly, if you committed a crime here in New Zealand or elsewhere, you could lose residence status. But permanent residence status doesn't require you to live here, and you could only lose it for the most serious of crimes. And so that's permanent residence after 2 years, and then after 5 years, citizenship, New Zealand citizenship, if you want it, and also if your country allows you to hold dual citizenship. Some countries don't allow that. Some of you could be wondering, why would I need a lawyer. Why would I use you? Have to pay you, Rachel, to help me with this process. Could I not do it myself? For some people, yes, you can do it on your own, but it really is more complicated than it appears. And so there are some challenges and some, excuse me, important timing issues to be aware of. And so for that reason, a lot of my clients, sorry, I'll have a glass of water. A lot of my clients find it helpful to work with me and my team so that we can take the stress out of the visa process, because there are so many other things involved with a move to the other side of the world. So if we can help you making that process streamlined, then we would. The other reason that it's worth noting is that in New Zealand we have what we call advisors, immigration advisors, and also lawyers. Typically, immigration lawyers are going to be more experienced and more capable in many cases with handling the more complex cases that you might come across. It takes a lot more time to become qualified as a lawyer than it does as an advisor. So you should have true experts helping you. And then the last thing that I think is really important is fees. At Lane Neve, we are very transparent with our fees. We'll tell you those at the outset, and we do our best to stick with them, but we'll set them all out for you, and we only move off them if something that's outside of the norm occurs, and in that case we would let you know. Whereas some other providers will ask all the fees up front and then they add fees later that you weren't expecting. So you just need to be very aware of that. And I guess the last reason that I love working with people from all around the world is because I've done this myself when I moved to England with my husband, and again when I moved home with my husband and 2 small children. So I do appreciate the challenges of making an international move, and it's a privilege to be able to help with a small part of that and help make that go smoothly for you. So you might have watched this webinar and be thinking, well, what do I do next if you're interested in exploring the opportunities to move to New Zealand? And I know that Prudence will talk about what's next from her side, but from me, because getting a job offer is very important, but for me it's also very important to actually start the process of the visa already in a small way. And there are 2 main reasons for that. The first reason is that if you have already gathered a number of the documents and started working with someone like me, then your employer is reassured that you're really serious about making the move and they feel confident to continue working with you to make an offer. And then secondly, if you've done that, then when you do get an offer, it will speed up the process. There are a lot of documents to gather, and INZ is very particular. There are all sorts of rules about the documents. So if you've done that in advance, working with me, then we've got them ready to go, and we can move quite quickly once you get an offer, which is always good for the employer. Here on this slide, you've got my contact details. You can see my Facebook handle there too. Please follow me on Facebook. I try and put updates when there's relevant changes. And I also invite you, if you'd like to have a call to talk about your case and any specifics to your case, a general introductory call for around about 20 minutes. There's no charge for that, so feel free to get in touch about that. I'm now going to hand it back to Prudence to wrap it up, and then hopefully we've got some time for questions. I also invite you to write any questions you've got in the little question box on your panel.
Hi there, you can hear me all right, Rachel?
Can do.
Great. Well, here's a wee fun fact. So they say New Zealand's quite a small place. I haven't actually asked Rachel if I could share this, but Rachel's mother 25 years ago was my nursing tutor. And so Rachel's come from a nursing family, so she appreciates what it's like, the hours and the medicine and so forth. And I think, once you've got someone in the family, you really have got that medical side. So look, any questions you've got, regardless if it's about bringing a cat or a dog over, if it's about shift work, uniforms, types of work, please just email info@ACCENT, and you should get a response. Often I do, much to my husband and children's dismay, work a little bit in the weekend and answer emails. Often when I'm at the basketball court on the sideline, I'll answer small just general small emails. Have a look us up on Facebook, ACCENT Health Recruitment, and then you'll get the job sent to you as well. So, and we appreciate full confidentiality, because we know that the medical community in Israel is quite a small place as well. So we'd love to help you. If anyone has any specific questions, I've got a wee list here that I can go through if you like, Rachel.
So I'm here too. So you start, Prudence, and we'll go back and forth.
I think the beauty is Rachel and I think we talk most days about needing a copy of a contract or how likely this medical council will come through, and we're kind of on the same track, which is really neat. But I often get questions, how soon in advance will I get my job offer to starting? Now, the employer will say, we've got a vacancy, we really want this specialised dermatologist, or we want this really good GP, and we're willing to fill this job with someone temporary until this person arrives. It's not unheard of to wait 10 to 12 months for an employer to wait that long, but more likely it's 6 months. So we want you recruitment ready. So we want your recommendation letters, we want your registration, and we want you ready to come. And I absolutely understand. Every time I jump on a plane and go to another country, which is quite frequently, I often think, oh gosh, passport, currency, exchanges, what have I packed, where am I going, my hotel booking, and I can't even appreciate, well I can, but not fully, the stress that you go under when you're moving to another country, because you're coming one way. And I do understand, having gone to England one way and nursed over there, that there's a lot to go through. So we're here. I often get calls in the weekend saying, what do you think of this car? I'm going to buy a car. Now, I'll be honest and say I'm not a car expert, but I'll often check in and see what kind of, vehicle it is and look at the price. And so we're here to help with everything, every step of the way. Other questions we get often about hours of work. So as I said, it's 40 hours of work a week, and we get paid fortnightly. Now, I'm not sure if that's a common term for everyone. I know in America they don't use the word fortnight, but every second week you tend to get paid, and as long as you've got your inland revenue tax number, so your IRD number, when you first arrive, that you'll get paid at the correct tax rate. Rachel, over to you with any other questions.
Thanks, Prudence. There's quite a few questions coming in about the age requirement at 55. So the way that it works is that you must be younger than 56 when you make your application. So if you turn 56 after the application is made, you'll be okay. But when the application is lodged, you need to be less than 56. So a couple of you are 55 now, and that means get cracking, get straight into it, start working with Prudence to see if there's a job offer, and be ready to make an application as soon as you can. And then as long as it's made before you turn 56. If you just want to come and experience living and working in New Zealand for a while, and you're not so focused on residence, and sometimes people at that age are saying, I just want to do a few years at this point in my career, I don't need to live in New Zealand forever, then the work visa does not have an age cap on it. So it's still possible that you could get a work visa, temporary visa, at the age of 56 or older. There's no age limit there. So, but for residents, you must be younger than 56. So that's that one. And also someone has asked about the slides being shared. I'm not sure about the slides, but certainly we will be making a recording of this webinar available. We're about to start our weekend here in New Zealand, and our IT people, our IT guys sitting next to me here, we've had a stressful evening with getting this webinar started. So we'll be distributing the link on Monday New Zealand time, so keep a lookout for that. Prudence, there's been quite a lot of people asking about caregivers. I'm just going to read out to you a couple of these queries for you to comment on, and then I've got some comments too. So we're saying here, I work in the caregiver sector in Israel after a long break in nursing. Can I migrate? And there's another one saying, I'm a caregiver here in Israel for 2 years. I'm originally from the Philippines. can I migrate? And there's several others actually about care workers. So would you like to make some comments on that?
And so, like, I've been recruiting for, as I said, over 20 years, and I've never recruited caregivers. It hasn't been an area of our expertise. I'm sure there will be agencies that can help, and I would have a look. If you want to email me at that info address, I can send you some websites that could perhaps recruit caregivers. From an immigration perspective, Rachel, are you...
Yeah, sorry. What I was saying, I can help you with getting a visa to work as a caregiver. And here in New Zealand, there are actually a lot of migrant workers working in the care sector. So that's an indication that there is a shortage of New Zealanders, and that is why New Zealand employers will look to the international market for caregivers to fill their vacancies. So there probably is a pretty good chance of being able to find work here. Prudence, another question for you says, if I have 20 months of experience as a dermatology specialist, when should I contact you to inquire about jobs in New Zealand?
Now, if you're a specialist and you've completed your training and have done the US equivalent of board certified or the UK equivalent of certificate of specialist training, really happy to look at your CV now. Thank you.
Another question here, which is visa related, is the residence tied to the job? Are you free to move jobs? So if you once you have residence, you are able to access the full labour market. But what I would say is that if you've come in on one of the special packages that some of the hospitals here offer, often they will bond some of the costs. So that means that, yes, you can move, but they'll say, well, it's cost us a lot of money to bring you here, and so we'll ask you to repay that if you move within 1 to 2 years. But you are actually able to access the full labour market on a residence visa. On just a temporary visa, that is tied to the specific employer. What else have we got here? I'm just having a little look. There's one question here about OTs, occupational therapist. Is a British occupational therapist degree valid in New Zealand, or would I need to do an additional exam or training?
No, that's good. British OT registration is absolutely accepted here, and there's a huge demand for OTs at the moment, and we're not sure why. It may be to do with expanded care services in the community or increased funding, but there's a huge demand for OTs. It's either physios or OTs we need. At the moment, it's a lot of OTs. So email me your CV. We'd love to help out.
Great. Another one here. This sounds like a classic one for you, Prudence. Thank you for the information. I'm a doctor, but not a specialist. How likely is it that there will be jobs for me, and are there opportunities to specialise within New Zealand as a foreigner?
I'd have to look at your CV, please. So please send it through to me. You could work as a medical officer, which is between a consultant specialist and a registrar. So a medical officer is a role that we often look for in psychiatry, general medicine, emergency, and I've placed a general surgeon and a gastroenterologist as medical officers. But I'd have to have a look at your CV to confirm that.
Another one here, which I'll answer part of it, and I'm sure you'll comment, Prudence, on your experience with employers. This question says, is it possible to come out to New Zealand on a holiday and do in-person interviews and workplace visits? So on the visa side, absolutely possible. You might need, in some countries, you'll actually need to apply for a visitor visa. In other countries, you could come out on the NZ ETA. You just need to be careful that you are only coming to visit and not to start work. But I also know, Prudence, it's absolutely encouraged from employers, and you'll be able to speak to that.
Yeah. Yes, workplace visits, but some people like to go into theatre or into patient consults or ward rounds, and very unlikely for that because you'll need clearance from COVID, MRSA, police clearance. You'll need clearance for just not occupational health, but clearance from an employment point of view as well. To have someone in the workplace visiting, there's interviews is absolutely fine and a tour around, but in the workplace, there's a bit of a fine line. But again, let me know your itinerary. We can set up some visits.
In my experience, employers have got so much better at employing just over Zoom because they've had to in the last few years. But in my experience, it's also so much easier to create the right rapport with someone if you can actually attend the interview in person. And Prudence, I know some of our clients, when they for very experienced specialist roles, their employer will actually fly them out for interview number 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Often doctors get flown out for interviews, which is a pretty great way to come out and see the country. They used to do it frequently until it was spoilt by a couple of doctors who treated it as a holiday a couple of times.
What else have we got here? What's this question? Is specialist accreditation from Singapore acceptable for registration in New Zealand? And there's a second part to that question. Especially in obs and gynae, obstetrics and gynecology, will the clinical rank be comparable in Singapore and New Zealand, e.g. consultant?
I'm not sure about what you were asking in the first part of the question, but please send me in your CV and I can either put it past medical council or have a look at it. And if there's a completion training or the equivalent of a board certification or equivalent of the CST or CCST, then they'll look on it very favourably. They look at things like within your scope of practice, they'll ask for a surgical log, how many babies you've delivered, a list of everything you've done in the last 5 years. If you can generate that electronically, that's super helpful. Surgical logs are really, really important and a great source of information.
Prudence, another one for you. What's the best way for subspecialists to assess if there's a need for their services, e.g. orthopaedic trauma?
Ask me and I can talk to employers. I can connect you with an employer. So send me a CV.
I was going to say there's a really common theme, which is get in touch, have a chat.
Yeah, send the CV. It's really good for me to have a look at CV, have a look at your training, qualifications, experience, and talk to employers. We know where a lot of the vacancies are, but they are quite fluid. And because doctors will often say, I want a job in this location. I've said, well, it won't be for 6 months. So let's just go through the process. There's quite a lot of risk, your end that you have to take by doing all the paperwork and doing your English language test, your home OET. You get that all sorted first and then apply for jobs, because often employers won't look at you until you've got your registration well underway.
There's another person here wrote in advance to say they had a question that they didn't want to discuss in the webinar, which is absolutely fine. So please feel free to get in touch with either of us, depending on whether it's a visa or a recruitment type question, no problem there. Another question here saying, what are salaries and hours negotiable? I understand the point on starting salaries being listed. However, I work in a specialist physio role and I'm well paid for this in the UK.
Right. Physios are really well paid in New Zealand and their rates have just gone up. If you're happy to email me, share with me what you're on. We compare that in New Zealand. It's often by step. It depends if you're working in the private or the public sector. Some of the private sectors surprise us by offering quite high amounts, and other private hospitals disappoint us, or private clinics, and we go back to them and say, look, no, that's not competitive enough. So we'll help you find the best salary. We know the good payers, we know the good employers, we know the good locations, but it's up to you to ultimately make that decision.
Okay, I think we're pretty much on time for wrap-up time. I know that we haven't managed to get to quite all the questions, but hopefully a lot of them. So you are invited to send your CV in or to send your questions in offline. I'm very happy to help if we can.
Lovely. Have a good weekend, everyone. Ours is just about to begin.
Thanks so much, everyone, for attending, and you should hopefully receive a link to this recording on Monday, but have a good weekend. Thanks so much. Thanks, Prudence.